So without further ado, we'll get underway. I'm going to hand it over to Jean-Francois. And again, thanks for being here.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Angus. Let me just get my screen set up here. As Angus mentioned, my name is Jean-Francois Chenier. I'm the Chief Product Officer at AgUnity. Um, just a little bit about me before we start. I've been in IT solutions for 30 plus years. About half that time was in corporate, corporate world, places like CP Rail and IBM Japan. And the other half has been at a mix of startups and consulting in Japan and Singapore and US and Canada. I joined AgUnity about 4 years ago to lead a project that they were doing for fair trade at that time, and became a CPO about 3 years ago, so about a year later. And really what attracted me to the company, and maybe the only important thing to remember from what I'm saying here, is that it was about the mission. The mission at AgUnity has always been very clear. It's about lifting smallholder farmers out of poverty. And I've never really been in a company where the North Star was just so clear and constant, and everyone was marching towards the same thing. That doesn't mean that we haven't changed direction on how we're going to achieve that. We've obviously iterated towards better solutions, but we know where we want to go, and I think that's one of the remarkable things about this place. Let me just see if I can figure out how to change pages. There we go. So what we do at AgUnity is we build technology that improves the lives of smallholder farmers. And I'll be talking a little bit about that technology today, as Angus said. But first, I wanted to give you a little context. And if you've attended some of our other investor calls, you may have seen some of this content before. I'm not going to go through all of it, but just a little bit to kind of talk about what we do, what we've been doing, and kind of the world that we operate in. So AgUnity has been around for about 8 years, since 2016. And in that time, we've partnered with organizations like Fairtrade, USAID, and World Food Program. You see all those logos down there. And really, in that work, we've improved the lives of hundreds of thousands of smallholder farmers in 75 countries. All those logos that you're looking at could kind of give you the impression that we're an NGO, but I really want to highlight that we're not that. We're a for-profit business, and about 80% of our revenue this year has been from commercial engagements. So we do get a little bit from NGOs to do some projects, but mostly it's commercial work. I've mentioned smallholder farmers a couple of times, so probably worth saying a little bit more about them and who they are. So when we say smallholder farmers, we're talking about remote, low-income farmers who typically cultivate less than 2 hectares of land, typically on a small family farm. And despite that tiny footprint, over 3 billion people depend on those farmers directly. And despite that, they struggle to earn a decent income. And they constitute the majority of the world's poor. A lot of these folks live on less than $2 a day, but the reality is they could easily earn more based on what they're producing. If you look at the value of what they produce in the aggregate, when it lands in consumer markets, it's got an estimated value of about $4.03 trillion. And so, they produce two things basically: a lot of high value commodities, like the ones you see on the right there, like coffee, cocoa, spices, and fruit, and also about 3/4 of the world's food. And they play a crucial role in their communities and in feeding the planet. So, given all that, it's a fair question to ask, like, why don't they earn more? And I think a big part of the answer comes down to this. It's a lack of direct market access. They participate in local informal markets often. They deal with middlemen, and they're completely locked out of certain markets due to lack of traceability data. And an example of that is kind of looming in the future, which is EUDR. So as of this December, we thought, and probably next December, so they've changed the timeline a bit, but the EUDR will completely lock out all farmers who don't meet their data requirements for traceability. So this is a huge issue that we're helping the farmers and the co-ops that we work with handle at this moment. And because of lack of access, smallholder farmers don't know directly what the market needs, what it's willing to pay. So it means that they often don't get a fair price. It means that they can make the wrong investments in the next year's seeds and fertilizing and practices and the learning that they do and the equipment that they get. And in the worst case, because of that lack of connection between the markets and them, perfectly good food can end up rotting in fields. And a surprisingly large proportion of food that they grow does that. So, click again. There we go. So the current reality in many of the value chains that we work with is that smallholders farmers, as I said, belong to an informal economy, which is very disconnected from the more formal economy that's optimized for profit. You know, farmers may trade within their communities, um, and they don't benefit from the more organized downstream activities like processing or retail and wholesale operations, which means that they don't benefit either financially from those operations that are optimized for profit, or in terms of getting reliable market information back, because their connection to those markets is often through informal aggregation through third parties and not directly through them. At AgUnity, our solution basically is to partner with farmer groups who bridge the gap between the formal and the informal economies. Our role is to provide those groups with the tools and the training they need to capture data from farm to market and kind of support the activity from the farmer all the way to the consumer digitally. And very generally, we've got three big offerings. Our field app, which is our, our, our mobile tools for offline data collection in the field. And that offline piece is important because so many of the people we work with don't have data coverage where they work or where they're doing transactions. The co-op manager, which is really around managing that data, generating reports, and Cropsless, which is a marketplace which connects the ecosystem that I'm talking about here digitally with buyers and consumers. The backbone of those solutions is our cloud services, and we call that the data farm. It's where all the data is stored, not the data, but the data, where we manage permissions across applications, where integrations like bank integrations happen. And the underlying data model has evolved over 8 years to support everything we've seen. So we've seen a lot of different value chains: sesame oil, coffee, cocoa, and more. We've seen complex workflows, both in how transactions are handled and paid for, and in processing. And the fact that we have a comprehensive data model for all this stuff means that we can extract insights from all the data that we collect. And when I think about our company and what's our secret sauce, I go back to that data model myself, because although it's invisible to users, um, it represents a lot of knowledge that we've gathered in a lot of different environments. And the other solutions that I've seen in the field deployed to our clients tend to store data in discrete files. So, Excel tables or Google Sheets. There are a bunch of separate tables that don't talk to each other, that can easily get out of sync, that can have data overwritten with no history of how the data got there. And so they don't have the power of this data model that sits at the core of everything that we do. But having talked about the core, let's take a little look in more depth at those applications that are kind of hovering around the edge, the yellow boxes there. So I'll start with the field apps, which is where we started as a company. Essentially, these are applications to collect data from farmers and co-op agents in various contexts. They work offline, they're easily localizable, and they rely on visual elements to convey meaning. And if you look at the one on the screen there, the navigation that's shown on the left, we try and use, this is just one model that we're exploring for our navigation for our second generation of apps. But we try and use colors. So, orange means kind of shopping, marketplace. Produce is green, cash is blue. If you're looking at a pentagon that's pointing away from you, it means you're giving something to someone. If you're looking at a pentagon that's pointing towards you, it means you're getting something from someone. And if you look on the right there, you see that when you're trading raw cocoa beans, there's a visual representation of the thing that you're trading. So again, this is just a concept right now for the next generation. But we do have a previous generation. So our first applications that we developed in this sort of space provided a digital identity to users, which is important, so that when they transacted in our system, they've got a single identity that follows them around, no matter what they're doing in there. It allowed them to record transactions, so crop handoffs. and access a ledger of the transaction. So if I'm a farmer, every time I hand off crop to a co-op, I would have a record of that. I'd be able to see how much I earned in the previous year. For example, how much the co-op still owes me, that kind of thing. They were also used, that first generation, to deliver surveys to either farmers or co-op agents to record information in the field. Right now, we're working on a new generation that'll have all of that functionality. And our initial focus has been on traceability and compliance, which is kind of a new space for us, at least in the field app world. So the first app that we've delivered is for collecting farm and farmer data, including GPS coordinates in the field. So what that means is that a co-op agent can go out to a farmer's field, push a button, and have the GPS coordinates for that field recorded back on the cloud in our server when they next sync their phone up with the cloud. And although that seems like a small thing, it's actually huge because, as I said before, this is at the core of a lot of certifications. But for GDPR in particular, they need to know where every farm that crop came from coming into the EU is from. Yeah, that's almost a sentence. And so our ability to collect that information cheaply in the field and empower co-ops to get that data is an important part of the strategy. The other part of GDPR compliance is obviously comparing that GPS data to satellite data so that we can evaluate whether or not the farm itself is in a deforested area, which is what the EU cares about. And then what we're planning on working next is processing apps, which will really track produce through the entire value chain to provide full traceability. So what I mean by that is as produce gets mixed and transformed and split up to be shipped, we provide traceability through all those processes so that when you are looking at a bag of coffee at the end of the process, for example, you can say which farms they came from, what GPS locations they're associated with, and see all the data that we have about the farmer that's relevant to the buyer at that stage. So that's the field apps. And this is a picture from one of our deployments of the transaction tracking apps in Kenya. It's from a project that we worked on with Virginia Tech in the vegetable value chain there. And Virginia Tech was really interested in testing the hypothesis that they could help improve nutrition and revenue for farmers by deploying blockchain technologies. So as they did that project, they found that there were a lot of benefits. Before the trade technology was deployed, trade was informal. The farmers, mostly female farmers, would go to market with vegetables when they had some handy and see what price they would get for the bunch that they were holding. And bunches were very ill-defined. And it was very much up to the whim of the purchaser. And there was no insight that the farmers could get about what was driving prices. Deploying the app drove some standards. So now the price, as they were transacting on the phone, which you can see them doing in that picture, was needed to be expressed in beer per kilogram. Not beer. I don't think they use beer there. But anyway, in per kilogram basis, price per kilogram. And that meant that farmers could then compare the prices that each other were getting. And that gave them more insight into the market and what was driving prices. And it also gave them the ability to negotiate because they could say, hey, this morning someone got, 10 cents for this, and now you're giving me, 5 cents for this. So it gave them a little bit more information going into that marketplace. The project also surfaced the opportunity to earn twice as much by implementing organic practices, because one of the drivers for price that they found was that farmers who were using organic practices could get literally twice the price for the vegetable they were bringing in. And also, small thing, but the fact that there were shared records meant that there were no more forgotten payments. Very often people weren't sure, like, I gave you some veg yesterday, you said you'd owe me something. I don't remember if you paid me, or last week. And then that would fall through the cracks. So, having shared record meant that they had an agreement, an agreed view of what had happened and what was owed. And it also meant that they had records for their business. And they could start to see that this thing that they treated as kind of a side business was generating, significant revenue for them and was worth taking a bit more seriously and treating more as a business. So there were a lot of benefits that came out of just rolling those apps out. And as it happens, Virginia Tech premiered a documentary about this project last month. It's called The Vegetable Connection. Um, right now, it's not posted online, though it's showing at a few festivals, though I'm told it'll be online soon. So if you are interested um, in the impact that this kind of technology can have in communities, and smallholder communities in particular, it's worth checking out. It's a link that I'm sure all of our AgUnity folks will be sharing when it's available, and I'll definitely be sharing that. So if you're interested, you can follow me and you'll see that link come along at some point. Okay, so getting back to the field apps then. So why are they important for us? And just in summary, it's just because they allow us to collect data in the conditions that they need to collect data in. What does that mean? It means that, as I said before, farmers co-ops often work in areas with no computers and no data coverage. So you really need the ability to collect data while you're offline and then, sync back to the model so that everyone's got the same view of the universe once you do have a hotspot available. Um, and the other is, the other challenge in these communities is around technical literacy. So, we found that uh, providing simple single function visual apps that are easily localized into the local languages or translated into the local languages really helps adoption and allows the projects to roll forward in a way that they couldn't if they were looking at more complicated menus in English or multifunction apps that have a whole bunch of little options hidden away in them. Um, so that's kind of the strategic importance of those. Moving on, I just want to talk a little bit about our co-op manager. So in our initial deployments, AgUnity did all of the field app configuration ourselves using our AgUnity portal, which was a more complex web interface designed really for expert users who knew exactly how every field in the system was being used and gave us a lot of flexibility. Um, the vision for the co-op manager, and we've started executing on it already, is to develop a user-friendly version of the portal that can be used by client farmers and farmer unions and cooperatives. So it's really about migrating a lot of what we've done in the past into a context where it's easier to understand and easier to use. We've already deployed a few simple screens that allow folks to manage farmer organization staff and certification data and to generate and view reports. And the feedback that we consistently get from the unions that we work with is that it's easy to use, and they don't need a lot of training to get there because there's a very consistent, simple interface kind of rolling through all of those things. So the next step is really to evolve the features that we've already deployed and to start to deploy features that support transactions and traceability and compliance, all things that I was talking about earlier. So, features that would allow us to manage payments to farmers, manage processing and inventory, and prepare lots for sale, and to post those lots for sale on CropsList, which I'll be talking about in a second, which is our marketplace, and to generate surveys and content for member farmers with phones. So again, getting that flow going in the other direction so that the farmers are pulling information from the system as well. So that's the vision. As I said, we've started making a few steps in that direction, and we've deployed to quite a few organizations at this point. This picture here is from one of our early efforts to make a user-friendly screen on our old AgUnity portal. And it was for a vanilla project in Sepik in Papua New Guinea. So the screen that we developed there allowed users to view the status of bank payments that were triggered automatically by field app transactions and to manage issues. So essentially, a farmer could bring in their vanilla, they do a transaction on the phone, so double handshake with QR codes, and then that transaction, once it was synced with the server, would automatically trigger a payment into the bank account. And this screen was just to make sure that those payments happened, or if for whatever reason the bank rejected the payment, that they could manage the issue and relaunch the payment from there. The deployment was part of a larger project to get farmers banked and provide financial education and promote savings and reinvestment in their farming businesses. So really to uplift the farmers in that region. And you can see here, this picture is just from an early part of the project where they were registering for their bank accounts to use in the project. So So why is the co-op manager important for us? Well, it's the project started at the end of 2023, so uh, just under a year ago, and it really represented a big strategic shift for us. Um, and um, it kind of gave us some new capabilities. So the key driver really was our ability to scale, because by moving data ownership and management to farmer groups, that frees up our team's time to manage more clients. It's that simple. So, we're moving the work that we were doing to the cooperatives, and so we can roll out more cooperatives at once. We're also at the same time, giving them ownership of their own data and their own processes and the ability to configure their own world the way they need it and really do more than just capture transactions with phones, which is what we had done in our initial deployments. Um, we've been fairly successful with that scaling in the past 10 months. We've onboarded 145 farmer organizations, and they've created records for about 58,000 farmers. So significant increase over what we were able to do in previous years. And I think this is just the beginning as we start building out more functionality in the co-op manager and having more and more co-ops on board. Um, so the other important aspect of this strategically for us as a company is that we're offering this as a freemium product with the basic functionality that co-ops need to manage their farm and certificate data, farmer and certificate data. And that acts as a lead generator for us. So organizations can self-onboard, and that opens the door for a conversation for us to see what else they need or how else we could help them essentially bring their product to market. If we think of that as the value proposition. Uh, Ultimately, this is going to be kind of the hub where people control the flow of their products, and it will provide that traceability from farm to market that's so important for both marketing purposes and compliance purposes. And once the farmers are registered, the co-op manager can become a platform for managing other things. So if I've got 1,000 farmers in my cooperative who were, for example, previously unbanked, now I can approach a bank and manage microloans on behalf of the bank, reducing the cost of managing those microloans and offering a service to the farmers through the cooperative. So it becomes a platform for managing other processes and other workflows beyond just the transactional ones and the processing ones that we cover right now. And it's important to remember that a lot of these farmers that we work with are currently invisible to banks. So this is just a whole new market that is attractive to them in the markets where we work. And then the other thing that's important about the co-op managers, because it allows, again, us to scale, it allows capture of data all along the production value chain, all along the value chain. It's got a lot of value, most simply because it will give early visibility on supply and supply issues to people who are interested in that. So because the production data has value, we think that once we've got enough of it, we can start to trade in that data. So the farmer groups will still own their data, and they can make money by saying, "Hey, I don't mind sharing my anonymous data with folks who are doing analysis." And then we can, as part of that, act as a data broker and make a little money off of that. So it's this kind of new revenue opportunity that just emerges from the simple fact of keeping good records in the field. Okay, let's jump to Cropslist then. So this last one I want to talk about, and we've already deployed an instance of Cropslist, which is our marketplace for the Ghana rice market. And we're going to be launching a more powerful next generation one in Q4 of this year. So very soon, in the next month or two, that should be out there. The new version is going to be similar to what you're looking at on the screen here. It's essentially a marketplace in this where consumers or buyers can go to get crop from producers. But the new version will have multiple storefronts. So it'll allow us to, for example, both host a B2B marketplace in Ghana for shea butter and rice, which is going to be our first deployment, and then follow that up with, for example, I think our second deployment might be a coffee marketplace early in 2025, where the co-ops that we work with can sell their coffee. So we can kind of carve up storefronts the way we need and create bespoke marketplaces for different markets and different buyers. And then obviously, like the current version, it's important to have just easy sign up for vendors and buyers. So we focused a lot on that. The next area of focus, once we've started deploying the marketplaces, is really that complete integration with the co-op manager. So as I mentioned before, the ability to post products via the co-op manager um, uh, workflows, and also post those products with the traceability information that's needed in that particular marketplace, which may vary from marketplace to marketplace. But it could be data about compliance, it could be data about quality, it could be data about sustainability, or some IoT device data that was collected throughout the processing. Any of those kinds of things can be then posted in the marketplace as part of that next step. And the ability to post digital data is a big deal. One of our clients, a union with almost 600,000 coffee farmers, when they were preparing for their fair trade audit last year, it looked like this. So the data's there. They're collecting the records that they need, but it's locked in paper documents. And collecting and posting this kind of data digitally is what they need in the case of this particular cooperative in order to keep trading with Europe. And in order to also make this fair trade auditing process cheaper for them, because they pay for the auditor to come to Ethiopia and go through all this. If they can start to digitally provide that online, then that should shorten the amount of time that the auditors are needed, and it should also reduce the cost significantly for the cooperatives. So there's a lot of benefit to sort of digitizing from the get-go, and obviously presenting that in a marketplace puts it in front of the people who matter, who care whether you're fair trade compliant or organic or on deforested, non-deforested land, or are not using forced labor, those kinds of things. So when we think in terms of strategic importance for this one, it's really that global market access that we started talking about when I started rambling about 25 minutes ago. It's really about connecting those farmers to that marketplace, not just the local one, but the global one, and giving them a direct link to the buyers, giving the buyers full traceability, and ultimately increasing their revenues. And by the way, ours as well at AgUnity, because we view this as ultimately what our main revenue stream will be through supporting the sale of product in marketplaces where the product has more value than locally, and taking some kind of transaction fee when that happens. So just to put this all together, and this is really my last slide here, a lot of data is generated along the value chain. Data about farms and farmers. So things like, training, contracts. What training has the farmers had? Are they organic certified? Have they signed commitments to, work without forced labor? And have those contracts been audited on some level? What's the location of the farms? What are their practices? All that data, we can collect about farmers. There's also transaction data, when crop was handed over. That's when the inventory appears sort of in our universe of AgUnity. And processing data, which boils down to, products either being merged from multiple farmers and containers, being transformed through processes like pressing and drying, being split for further processing or shipping. It includes IoT data, which I mentioned a second ago, things like temperature and humidity monitoring during fermentation, packaging data. So all that data, our vision, and it's partly executed already, is collected through field apps and the co-op manager as product moves from the farm to package, essentially. And then it gets stored on the data farm, which then allows cooperatives and other sellers to post then the final product online with a link to all that provenance data. So, that provenance data includes any of the things that I just talked about that can then be presented in that context, adding value to the crop, or even just allowing it to be sold in the market where it's being shipped. So on that note, I'll stop here and just see if anyone has any questions.
Thank you very much, Jean-Francois. That was a wonderful presentation. We've got a few questions have already come through as you've been talking. So maybe we'll start with these, and just for anyone who's on the webinar, if you just go to Q&A, feel free to punch in some questions. Yeah, I've got a few more coming through now. So I guess the first question I've got is, what's the approach with product development, working with people with low literacy?
Okay. Yeah. So basically, a lot of this comes back to our program team. So again, if you've been to some of our other presentations, you know that we've got a team that's in the field, led by Nurvitria, who's based in Indonesia, and they worked deploying our application from the beginning, before when I joined the company. So they've got a lot of knowledge about these communities and the farmers that we're working with. So we work in an agile way. Um, and it's very hard to get, ideally in a perfect world, we'd be sitting in front of users and getting feedback directly from them. But what we tend to do is use that program team as proxies for the farmers so that they can give us a sense of what will work and what will not work with that audience. And then they also go back to the community. So for example, if we've got two designs that we're debating which one would work better for our clients, they can go out and do a little paper A/B test, show them two interfaces and say, oh, if you're trying to do this, what would you do on this interface? Or what would you do on this version of the interface? So, you know, I guess, yeah, answer boils down to two things. One is, the program team acting as proxy for farmers. And the other is actually going out and talking to farmers and cooperatives and doing some A/B testing when we can.
This one, thanks, Jean-Francois. This one may be for either yourself or Stefan. Can you integrate with most banks and financial services?
Yeah, let's let Stefan take this one. Yeah.
All right. Yes, so we can indeed integrate, and we have already integrated with one in Papua New Guinea. So it depends on the bank itself, obviously, but from the AgUnity side, it's relatively easy to do the integration.
Fantastic. And Stefan, just maybe while we've got you on the mic, this hasn't come through as a question, but I guess just for anyone who's curious, are you happy to just very quickly just talk through what tech stack we use and why, and I don't know, anything we've learned about it?
Sure. So we use JavaScript for our front end, both mobile and web. C# backend, SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server for the database, and Celo blockchain for wherever we need blockchain. We basically pick that partly based on the skill levels available in the but JavaScript is a pretty common skill. Also based on scalability and best of breed. Basically, we think these tools will allow us to scale up and provide the solutions as fast as possible.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stefan. So I've got three more questions, and please keep your questions coming. These are all great questions. How well does this scale up for larger cooperatives and other regions?
Yeah. I mean, are we talking from a technical perspective or from a product perspective? Because I think both answers.
Yeah.
Let's answer both.
Okay, you start, Stefan.
Okay,
Yeah.
so from a technical, the existing system was built with scalability in mind. We are nowhere near the top of what our current stack can handle, and we can handle 100 times more users and farmers without any stress to the system.
Okay. And then, yeah, I think from a product perspective, I think the key dimensions I mentioned in the presentation are that we've shifted our focus to really empowering cooperatives. So, in the past, our ability to scale was really limited by the size of our own team. What we're trying to do now, and it's been working well, is to give the cooperatives the tools they need, simple tools that they need to scale themselves. And that does a couple of things. I mean, not only does it free us up, and not only does it give them power, but it creates a demand for the data that the farmers are generating. So, one of the challenges we had in our first few deployments was, what's the driver for the farmers to keep doing this when we leave town? And by essentially giving the co-ops the ability to create an ecosystem that depends on that data, then it's kind of also driving the push to roll out the devices to farmers. so that they can have the information they need to then put it in the marketplaces with all the data that they want to put in there. So it's creating more pull from outside of the farmers world, even though the farmers are still our main focus in terms of mission. What we've done is just create a world where the data is needed and where it makes sense to fund the devices for them, for people outside of them who want the stuff that they're growing. And that includes buyers, and that includes cooperatives. So hope that answers the question.
No, I think that was a really good, Jean-Francois. And I think it's worth, I'm just going to jump in. I think it's worth mentioning, AgUnity, we've been working with, so we have, commercial clients, as Jean-Francois mentioned, and one of them is Fairtrade. And, we've been working with them for about 4 years. And the platform we've built for them is kind of based on our back end, but, they've deployed that to, I think, 75 countries, covering, I think maybe it's even, I say 1,800, but I think it might even be close to 2,000 cooperatives that represent about 1.8 million farmers. So just as a that's probably more on the technical side, but just as a context for our ability to have a product that can go global, I mean, we've already done that. And for what it's worth, Fairtrade continue to come back asking for us to continue to help build and enhance that platform, because they're incredibly happy with how it works in all the countries they work in. I've got 3 more questions. We've still got a bit of time, so I'll get through these questions. What types/fields of data are captured that can be useful to all stakeholders, AgUnity, farmers, co-ops, etc.?
Farmers. Okay, what types of data? I mean, there's a lot. I think obviously the core transaction data is important. That's basic business records for the farmers and the cooperative. So that's a key thing. For farmers, there's a lot of farmer level compliance information that's needed. So I think I mentioned a few of them in the presentation, but they're things like, what training they've received, what fertilizers they use, where their farms are, what contracts they've signed, obviously where each of their fields are, and what's the perimeter of each of those fields. So there's kind of a lot of farmer and farm level data that's important. When you get to the co-op, and if you think of that sort of that chart that connected the informal to the formal market, there's all the stuff that happens through aggregation. So how that product gets mixed, through processing, how that product gets transformed. So seeds become oil, for example, and then how that product is packaged. So there's data along the way there that's collected that's important, A, to provide traceability, and B, to be able to talk about quality, right? Because the process it went through, how fresh it is, what the temperature was when it was pressed, all these kinds of things can be important to a buyer. And some products like cocoa are very, very sensitive to the conditions under which they're fermented and dried. I think, so it's really transaction and processing data are the key ones. And then obviously on the other end, if I'm selling on a marketplace, it's all the business records associated with that. So, the co-op, if it's the co-op doing the selling, has records of, where it's sold, who it's sold to, what they were looking for, how often they buy from them. So much more detailed digital records than they've had in the past about the people buying from them.
Would you say, Jean-Francois, kind of, what about the idea of like yield forecasting? Like, our ability to, as we kind of continue to we expand and reach scale, but actually start to have some pretty good data on, the coffee market in Ethiopia. We know what percentage is likely to be produced.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of interesting things. Like, ultimately, we'll have enough data to come up with models for that, or to provide it to people who want to come up with models for that, right? So there's a lot of analytics that can be done. I think with regards specifically to forecasting, the weather is getting wonky all over the planet. So it's one thing to have a model to sort of say, oh, I know what the weather's going to be this year, or I think I know what the weather's going to be this year, and predict based on that. But I think the other thing that we're going to have here that will make those models more powerful is the ability to very early in the season see, like, what, the marketplace can go in both directions, right? So what kind of fertilizers are they using this year? Maybe they're going cheaper for whatever reason. Or what's the early crop look like? What kind of fertilizers are they using this year? Maybe they're going cheaper for whatever reason. Or what's the early crop look like? Maybe they're going cheaper for whatever reason. Or what's the early crop look like? maybe it's lower than expected or higher than expected. So there'll be a lot of information to feed those models. Now, are we going to be the owners of those models? At this point, uh, it's not a decision we've made, but definitely this data has got that value of being able to provide that kind of insight, and that's definitely part of the end game as well.
Thanks, Jean-Francois. Let's continue on these questions I've got. Can we talk a little through the security of the data? So this might be yourself, Stefan.
Yeah.
I mean, so we employ multiple security models. So there's obviously logon, passwords, there's permissions, and all data is segregated between the clients so that it's impossible, for example, for one client to access the data of another client. In addition to which, the data sits in a very hierarchical position setup. So, for example, if you have a co-op, a union, farmers, the co-op cannot access the co-op data. Sorry, cannot access the union data, regardless of what any permissions built into the system. So, in addition to which, we have various protections on the server side, firewalls, and others to help protect the information.
Thanks, Stefan. And also noting, because I remember going through the process, but we're also GDPR compliant. So in terms of Europe's quite high standards on data privacy, we're compliant with that. I've got two more questions, and really appreciate all these questions from everyone attending today. So I've got, how soon will a cafe in Sydney, Singapore, or Amsterdam be able to buy coffee from Cropslist? And will the cafe be able to share with their customers where the coffee beans were sourced, given the traceability data of what your platform can capture?
Yeah. So I think the answer is, and my hope is that we've got a coffee marketplace happening in Q1 of next year. So, like I said, we'll be rolling out sort of the Ghana marketplace in the next month or two, and then early next year, that I would love that to be the next one. I think in terms of will they be able to see where the coffee's from, the answer to that is definitely. So at the co-op level. So I think there's two levels of traceability at this point. One is I kind of think of as traceability light, and the other is sort of full traceability. Traceability light is if I'm buying coffee from a co-op and they know where all their farms are, I can say that the coffee you're buying comes from, this region of Oromia, which has these general properties. And, I can even do a deforestation analysis on all the farms that sell to that co-op and provide information based on that. Also about the cooperative itself and any information they've provided into the system, because, they're a storefront fundamentally. Or rather, they're a shop within a storefront. Full traceability is kind of premised on being able to follow processing all the way through, and not only say all the things that I just said about the coffee, but say specifically this particular shipment came from these 30 farmers or 100 farmers, as opposed to the 1,000 farmers who sell to the co-op. That will come later. I think a lot of that, it's on the roadmap right now. We haven't got a timeline for exactly when it will happen. I think some of it depends. Obviously, we're doing some fundraising now, which is around funding those very kinds of things. So, my hope is that, yes, we get the funding to do that. Again, I would imagine that would roll out a little bit later for coffee, maybe in Q2 of next year if the winds at our back. But certainly the first part, I think we should be able to execute in Q1.
Thanks, Jean-Francois. And then I've got the final question, and if people have any more questions, your last chance. But otherwise, final question I've got, you mentioned helping with organic farming techniques that helped achieve higher prices. Is farmer education, general ag training, and maybe even basic business fundamentals part of AgUnity as you expand and grow?
So this is a lot like the data question. So the reality is that in collecting this data and getting the co-ops digitized, we'll know who the farmers are. We'll know who's farming what. We'll have a lot of information about farmers, and we'll be able to push information to farmers that's relevant to them. So there'll be the ability to say, all coffee farmers at high altitudes should know this thing, whatever, about pruning that'll help them increase their yields. So we can definitely start to push information in that direction. Now, are we going to be the sole generators of that information? I think initially the answer is no. I think initially what we'll do is we'll make that pipe available to people who do have that information and data and a mandate to educate farmers. So we'll be another tool in the toolbox for NGOs who have information they want to disseminate to farmers, because we'll provide a pipeline for that. Now, over time, will it make sense for us to sort of step into that business a little bit too and hire our own experts? I think the answer is probably yes, but that's kind of a downstream from what we've been talking about today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jean-Francois. We don't have any more questions, so I think unless any come through right now, we will call it there for today. So a really big thank you, Jean-Francois and Stefan, for today's webinar. A really big thank you to everyone who's joined. And for those that can't join, because I know that some people have messaged they couldn't make this time, we will share this recording of this webinar after this. And if you do have any questions that you weren't able to ask by not being on the call, please just reply via email, and I'll make sure that Jean-Francois and or Stefan can get some responses to those. Yeah, apart from that, if you are interested in learning more about the capital raise, I think we're about 40% subscribed. Please reach out to investment@agunity.com or to David, Peter, or myself. We're having active conversations, so happy to chat. And that's it for today. So thank you very much, everyone. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.